I am Adam. So we'll just jump right in it. First off, the very basic question, what is organic? If you ask any number of different people, you'll get any number of different answers. The truth of the matter is organic is actually a labeling term, and legally speaking, it's a claim. And what I mean by that, if a product says fat-free on it, it has to be fat-free. By the same token, if a product says organic, it has to actually be organic. And what determines that is a set of regulations at a federal level. They have specific allowances, specific things prohibited, and just some generalities to them as well. And so basically when you say this product is organic or certified organic, you're actually saying it's been produced through these particular methods. It's a third-party certification system, and what I mean by that, it's not something that you yourself attest to. It's not something that your buyer attests to. It's an independent party, someone that's disinterested in the transaction, in the process, that is verifying that you are adhering to the program. It is under the control of the United States Department of Agriculture. Sometimes people want to use the word organic as just kind of, an adjective describing what they're doing. That's not possible. In terms of agricultural products, it's a label claim, and that label claim is under the jurisdiction of the USDA, and so that's why organic certification even exists. Basically, they want to make sure that whenever you buy any product that says it's organic, it is what it says it is. And that may mean it's something different than what someone perceives organic to be, but at least it's a level playing field. Prior to the federal regulations, there was a patchwork of various state regulations for organic. So what was organic in one state would not necessarily be organic in another. So that's why ultimately the federal regulations came about. The actual section of the federal regulations is Section 7, which tells us agriculture, and then specifically 205. So 205.205 is for crop rotation and so on. So you may hear me reference some of those or see some of those in some literature. But it just goes back to the federal regs. Sometimes that's generically called the rule or the regulations, and so that's what they're speaking to. This is what governs everything we do with organic certification. One thing I often like to address is what are some misconceptions with certified organic. One of the first things, and very often you'll hear people say, well, I'm not organic, but I'm pesticide free or something like that. Well, lo and behold, certified organic is not free from pesticides. There's any number of pesticides you can use. They're not synthetic pesticides. They're different from conventional pesticides, but they are still pesticides. So to say that organic is chemical free or pesticide free is not accurate. Organic is not all natural. Sometimes people want to substitute natural as a label for organic. There are synthetics allowed in the production of organic where we're talking crop or livestock, but it's limited. As a rule, organic is natural and doesn't allow synthetics, but not entirely. And that's what number 3 specifically points to. There's also natural substances that are disallowed. So just because something is a natural substance doesn't mean it's automatically included or allowed within organic production. And this is referencing just those sections that mention synthetic products either allowed or natural products disallowed, and those are in the 600s of the regulations. So who has to be certified? In the event that you're producing agricultural products, and it is only agricultural products that this covers, if you're selling more than $5,000 gross of organic product, then you have to be certified. If you're selling less than $5,000 gross, you do not have to be certified in order to use the word organic in marketing terms, but it does limit some of the marketing options you have. And what I mean by that is for you, you can sell the product as organic. But if you're going to sell the blueberries to a baker, for instance, who was going to make an organic muffin, they have to buy certified organic. They can't buy your exempt organic blueberries. That doesn't, essentially the way I view it is the organic doesn't travel with the product. It's for that direct sale relationship. And the reason this exclusion or exemption exists is to avoid impacting the very smallest of producers. Most federal regulations, if you're familiar, will have some sort of exclusion based on small and very small producers, and that's where this comes from. Approved methods, I kind of lightly touched on this before. These are the methods that are contained within the regulations, or at least the concepts contained within the regulations. There are many things that are not prescriptive within the regs, but basically the 10,000 foot view, the approved methods integrate cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster the cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. So those three things, the cycling of resources, ecological balance, and conserving diversity are kind of the big three. So everything that we do tries to support those in some way. As a general rule, synthetic inputs, sewage sludge, irradiation, and genetic engineering may not be used. Another one that's sometimes a little surprising to people or not thought of, treated lumber. You can't use treated lumber in organic production. As an alternative to treated lumber, you can use either naturally decay resistant, such as cedar, things like that, redwood. You can also use metal post, concrete. There's different options possible. But the biggest thing is there's not a good wood treatment that is also not synthetic. There are allowances within the transition for pre-existing, and we can talk about that more specifically when we get that section. So there is the ability to have a transition of existing materials into a certified organic system. If treated lumber has been in place already prior to your, or as part of your 36-month transition, it is okay. I'll elaborate more on that so it's a little bit clearer, but as a rule, you cannot, as new production, use treated lumber. So what can be certified? When we're talking about certified, there's actually 4 areas or scopes. The first being crops. This is plants, so food or fiber, livestock feed, and kind of the physical ground. So that's kind of all lumped under crops, livestock, animals or their products, whether you're talking food or fiber. The livestock themselves has to be on certified ground, so you have to also include crop. There's also processed products, and that ranges from anything from, packing berries to making jam to health and beauty, various things. And then there's wild crops. So these are crops that are harvested out of the wild. They have minimal management, they're not planted and so on. So those are the 4 scopes. I would expect a primary interest is crops, so that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on today. Basic requirements for certification. Okay, this is where we get into what's called as the transition. So basically, 36 months prior to organic certification, the land has to be free from prohibited substances. And so you can't have applied conventional fertilizers, pesticides, treated seed, GMO seed, things of that nature. And so that's for a 36-month period. This would also be the element by which we can allow pre-existing treated lumber and things like that to be in an organic system. As long as it's been there longer than 36 months, it's been transitioned in, and so it's not an application of a prohibited substance. So what happens with a new post, that's a new application. So you'd have to go 36 months from that date for organic certification. Now there is some allowance for allowing like exterior fencing to an operation. If that's a treated post, as long as we have a sufficient buffer in place, we may be able to replace posts and things like that. So it's very much situational dependent, in fact dependent on where a post might be placed and what role it's playing in the operation. The time clock is literally the last date of a prohibited application of a substance. So let's say that 2 years ago you had reseeded a pasture and you used clover that was inoculated with a GMO inoculant. From that date of planting, if you hadn't applied anything else, it would be that date. So it doesn't have to be today's date because now you decide. It was when was your last application of a prohibited substance by your records, and that's it. And we do have kind of an attestation statement within our program that you can use, because lots of times records that are kept prior to organic certification are not necessarily as detailed as we would like. So there is the ability to make a statement to confirm that transition period. Buffer zones vary dramatically. And what a buffer zone is, it's a area that prevents or likely prevents the movement of a prohibited substance onto the production area. So you're looking at things such as runoff, spray drift, things like that primarily. In a scenario around a home or a house, several dozen feet will be sufficient in most instances, unless you're firing up a big high-powered lawn sprayer and you're having a lot of drift or something like that, which ordinarily we don't see that, because especially when we're talking about crops and you're thinking about overspray, lots of times you're thinking herbicide and things like that. So it's naturally something that doesn't occur a lot, because obviously herbicide drift onto a crop is a problem for your crop. But it's very situational dependent. It varies greatly based on the topography, if your crop ground is above something versus below something where it could be drained into, and it depends what activity is happening adjacent to it. A Roundup Ready cornfield that's under intense cultivation with spraying and everything is different than a pasture that's nice and weedy and basically gets no attention. So it's very much situational dependent. There is no prescriptive number within the regulations, but typically 20 to 30 feet for most instances is sufficient, but in some instances that may be too much, and of course there are scenarios where that would not be enough. So it's very hard to give a set number or distance that's perfect for all situations. The physical characteristics of a buffer area do come into play. So there is a difference between a bare fence line and a woody fence line, or a wooded area versus a pasture area. There are differences that the physical makeup, such as vegetation, do play. Because obviously a thick buffered area that has dense vegetation is different than one that's free and open. Can a high tunnel be a buffer zone? Maybe. It's one of those scenarios where if it's in an area where there's going to be overspray or runoff or things like that, I'm assuming you're in the high tunnel but in the ground. The worry with something like a high tunnel is, what if you're not there and he sprays? One of the best things an organic producer can do is have a working relationship with their neighbors, and one that, that way they understand what your needs are, and that you're not making demands of them, but if you can be previously aware. And again, theoretically, maybe a high tunnel could work, but if it's right up against an area that's being sprayed, no, because there's just too great a pressure, too many what ifs that come into my mind that I can't be fully assured. Now, the likelihood, may be very low, especially with a scenario, but and again, it's very much situational dependent. If there's a topography difference where they're much lower and you're up here, then it becomes less sensitive than if you're on the same even level, very close with each other. So again, that's one of those things where typically we'd have to see some pictures or actually visit the site before we'd ever kind of give an indication what we would feel would be acceptable.